Let's talk about the world's biggest economy, because it affects just about everyone. Depending on what you read, the US economy is well on the way to recovery after the crisis caused by COVID-19.
The markets are buoyant, consumer confidence is decent.
Or it's stalling and leaving millions of people behind.
Food insecurity, homelessness, and it's not going to be repaired anytime soon.
The whole world is trying to get back on track, but how long that will take depends a lot on the Americans.
What happens in the United States really does have an impact on the rest of the world.
So who really created the strong US economy before the pandemic hit? Is the recovery starting to slow? And is inequality getting worse, not better? By some measures, China these days is considered the biggest economy in the world. But when you look at the value of all of its goods and services, the United States is still number one. So what is the American economy? It's Silicon Valley, Hollywood, oil, manufacturing, finance. It's pretty mixed. The US is also the most important export destination for a fifth of all countries. That's because Americans consume a lot. So much that they're the engine of the US economy.
The main driver is consumer spending. It accounts for roughly 2/3 of US economic growth. That's literally consumers putting their hands in their pockets, going out and buying things.
And it all ripples throughout the fabric of the global economy.
So when our consumers are doing well in this country, that actually means that businesses and employees and consumers in other parts of the world do better as well.
Another reason the US economy matters to all of us is that the US dollar is the undisputed king of currencies. Most global transactions and trading in things like oil and gold are done in US dollars. It wasn't always that way. Countries used to settle international transactions in gold. But after World War II, countries needed more flexibility to rebuild their economies and chose to peg their currencies to the dollar. That's because the US had the most gold at the time. A strong dollar can be good or bad, depending on who you are. Japan needs the dollar to be stronger against the yen, so American consumers can afford more Japanese products. But a country like Turkey would rather a weaker US currency because banks and businesses there hold a lot of debt in dollars. In other countries, a strong dollar can fuel inflation. In Argentina, that pushes up prices for basic things like food. And in the US, a strong greenback makes imported goods cheaper, but it can harm US manufacturers by making their goods more expensive abroad. Overall, though, the dollar is largely seen as a safe currency. During the pandemic, it actually rose.
It's the worst economic crisis in the last 70 years. And there's one safe haven everyone is banking on, and it's not gold, it's the dollar.
Lately, the US dollar has gone up and down. That has to do with all sorts of things. Even a tweet from President Trump can help or hurt the exchange rate. But a lot rides on how the US economy performs. So how is it doing? Economies are measured using GDP, which is the total value of goods and services produced in that country over a period of time. And you can see that over the last 10 years, the US economy has been growing. Last year, GDP rose by just over 2%, but it took a while to get there. Like the rest of the world, the US economy was devastated by the financial crisis in 2008. President George W. Bush started the cleanup, shoring up banks and rescuing US companies. The Federal Reserve also played a massive role, buying bonds and keeping interest rates low. And all that continued under President Barack Obama. Congress spent hundreds of billions of dollars on things like Social Security and tax relief. By 2009, the US had started its longest economic expansion on record. Then President Donald Trump stepped in.
From the instant I took office, I moved rapidly to revive the US economy.
The economy did keep growing, but the 4 to 6% boost he promised, well, that didn't happen.
He came into office and inherited an economy that had been strongly growing since 2010. So for 6 or 7 years, growth was already baked in.
Trump added his own touch. He cut regulations to make doing business easier and got Congress to pass tax cuts for American workers and corporations. The promise there was to help businesses reinvest money to create jobs. But it didn't always work that way. A lot of those companies used those tax savings to buy back stocks and boost their value instead. Then there's Trump's trade policy of putting America first. He ripped up international trade deals saying they were unfair and hurt American manufacturing.
The United States has lost about 5 million manufacturing jobs over the last 20 years and about 91,000 factories.
We've seen over the past few years tensions arise between us and between some of our trading partners. I think one of the things that this current administration has done is put a focus on China.
I am the chosen one. Somebody had to do it, so I'm taking on China.
And that led to a trade war. The U.S. slapped penalties on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. China responded with their own. China also found ways around some of those tariffs.
They have succeeded in reducing imports from China, but China has just rerouted those imports through other countries.
The main thing about Trump's tenure was that the American public started to feel a whole lot better about the economy, and that had an important effect.
When consumers feel confident about their financial prospects, they're more likely to spend. They're more likely to go out and buy things on credit.
So the economy was in good shape, and the U.S. jobs market was on fire. Then COVID-19 came along and pushed the economy off a cliff.
Stocks crashing to their worst losses in over 30 years.
The U.S. economy slid 5% in the first quarter when it officially fell into recession. Then in the second quarter, it nosedived at a record annual rate of more than 30%.
We went from some of the lowest unemployment rates in our nation's history to levels that have not been seen in most of our lifetime, certainly not in my lifetime.
The pandemic still isn't over, but the focus now is on the economic recovery. In the third quarter of 2020, the economy bounced back a record 33%. The Federal Reserve helped by unleashing a range of measures to keep credit flowing to businesses and households, like cutting interest rates to make borrowing cheaper. Congress also allocated trillions of dollars in aid to keep workers and businesses afloat and jumpstart growth. That's a lot of money.
That was a big help to U.S. households and a big boon to the economy because it helped consumer spending.
As you've seen some states reopen, but you've actually seen a very sharp recovery.
The stock market also came roaring back. One reason was that tech companies benefited from the shift to people working and learning from home. You know what else is up? House prices. Mortgage rates are at a record low, and lockdowns have inspired many homeowners to sell their digs for bigger ones in the suburbs. So people who own shares or homes, they're doing okay. But what about the rest? Well, some economists are saying this is the most unequal recovery in American history.
Those at the top, those who can telecommute, who can do their business by Zoom, are doing fine. In fact, many of those individuals are continuing to receive incomes, and yet they're spending less, so they're saving more. And so their wealth is going up.
Contrast that to somebody who cannot work remotely. They're not doing well right now. There's a survey out that showed that 1 in 3 renters did not pay their rent on time in the first week of September. We also see very, very sharp racial disparities as well.
We also know that economic recovery is starting to slow down. COVID-19 is still spreading. Some of that financial help we talked about has expired, and Republicans and Democrats in Congress can't agree on the next aid package.
Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell warned that without more aid coming from the federal government, the U.S. economic recovery is in jeopardy.
The outlook for the economy is extraordinarily uncertain. There are still roughly 11 million people still out of work due to the pandemic.
You don't want to see the recovery going off the rails in the world's largest economy.
Getting the U.S. economy back to its pre-pandemic strength could take years, and how long the virus sticks around will make a difference. We know the world economy is interconnected. It's like an ecosystem. And on that basis, the U.S. needs to do well for all of us to turn the corner. If you want to get a better understanding of the stories in the news, you can find all of our episodes on YouTube. Just look for Start Here. You can also find us on Al Jazeera's Facebook page and on our website, aljazeera.com. Make sure to subscribe wherever you're watching, and we'll see you next week.